Hello, and welcome to my next tutorial on how to install Gentoo Linux. Now, the reason I'm going to show you how to install Gentoo Linux is it's one of the most difficult installations of Linux you'll ever see that you'll come across. Everything is absolutely manual, and people I've seen really struggle to even install this distribution after they've used Linux for years. But this Linux distro installation will actually teach you how and what is going on during the installation of any other Linux distribution you use. I recommend at least doing this once so you understand how it works and what's going on. So let's get started. I'm going to install this in a KVM system. The first thing I want to show you too is this handbook. All my notes are coming from here. wiki.gentoo.org, wiki handbook, AMD. And the community for Gentoo is excellent. They write some of the best documentation for Linux. Many times even tutorials that I've used come from Gentoo Linux, and I've used them on other distributions like IB tables and stuff like that. So don't be scared of someone showing you how to do something in Gentoo versus another Linux distribution. Okay, so let's get started. Now, I downloaded the installation package, so if you go to main page and you go to see, this is the wiki Gentoo. So if you go to downloads here, I'm going to do a stage 3 install here. They used to recommend doing stage 1 and stage 2 installs. They don't do that anymore. Stage 1 and 2 are for testing purposes only. So essentially I'm going to install from stage 3 only. So yeah, I downloaded this already. It's only 211 megs. If you notice here, that's super small compared to most distributions. And let's get started with that. So we're going to do a new virtual machine here. We'll call it Gentoo. I'm going to browse for this ISO. If I have it in my downloads, and I'm going to select Linux here, and I'm going to do generic 2.6.x kernel. They don't actually have Gentoo in this list, so I'm just going to select this generic one. Here I'm going to give it 2 megs of RAM, 2 gigabytes of RAM, sorry, and I'm going to do 4 cores. I recommend you having at least 4 cores. For this virtual machine. Gentoo is also a completely compiled from source distribution. So if you're used to like Debian or Red Hat on their RPM and deb files, those are all precompiled. In Gentoo Linux, nothing is precompiled. Everything is compiled from source. So it takes a considerable amount of time, but the system is highly optimized to what you want, as well as only the packages you want. So let's get started here. I'm going to do 20 gigs here. You need about 4 or 5 gigs total. If you're going to do a GUI, I recommend doing 20, but you can also do this allocate entire disk space, uncheck that so it doesn't actually eat up all your space. The rest of these advanced options are fine. I'm just going to use NAT here. The rest of these are just the generic settings, and I just click finish. Okay. So you get here, and if you don't press enter in the next 15 seconds, it's going to boot from the hard drive, which there's nothing. So you want to click inside there and press enter. And it's going to boot a generic Linux distribution. And it's very strange, but Linux actually boots Linux first to install Linux. And if you didn't know that, you'll realize it very quickly here that in order to install Linux, you need a Linux running first. And the entire time you're installing it from a different distribution, it's actually doing similar to what we're going to do, and you actually have a full operating system here already. So who am I? I'm logged under as root, and I can run like top and stuff. I mean, this is essentially a completely ready to go Linux system, but this is going to help us to install Linux on the hard drive and get it started. So this is how it starts, just with the prompt. I know it's probably very different than most other operating systems, Linux operating systems you've installed. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually enable SSH, so I can get SSH'd into this machine and make the prompts bigger for the tutorial. So we want to start SSH, and you want to set the root password. Okay. Get the IP address. Get me out of here. Okay. Now, so here's a terminal, and now I can actually SSH into this root 192.168.122.190. And now we're actually SSH'd into the installation part of this tutorial. And the reason I do this is just to make it bigger. So I'm going to minimize this. I'm going to maximize that. Okay. So I'm sure this is very, very, very different. But the first thing we're going to do is you got to format the hard drive. And most of the time this is all done automatically on the other distros. So we're going to do fdisk -l, and wow, just spit out tons of garbage, which is not what I expected. Okay. It must have, yeah, it has this weird, probably because we didn't allocate all the space at once, and it's just going crazy here, which is, has tons of RAM disks and stuff. Pretty strange here. But anyway, this didn't happen last time I did this. But anyway, this is my primary disks down here. It's 20 gigs, you can see here, and it's under SDA. Now, if you're installing this on a newer machine and it has like that EUFI boot stuff, you're going to have to follow the Gentoo tutorial and install that stuff manually. And it's a little different than what I'm going to show you here, because this is inside of KVM, and it just presents a generic disk SDA here to us. So follow the tutorial if you're going to try to do this on your own machine. Okay, so we're going to do fdisk here. And it says it's like a DOS type thing. It's probably part of the reason that it freaked out and threw all this stuff out. I guess these are all RAM stuff too. Actually, it just says the RAM, which is, I've never seen that before. But anyway, we'll see if this works. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is make the boot partition. And for the boot partition, you just do new, and I do primary, and I do 1, and I start at the first sector, and I go to 512 megs. And lots of times people make this smaller, but 512 is pretty good size. I have plenty of space. I have 20 gigs. So a 512 meg boot partition isn't bad. Okay, now if you do P, you'll see that we have a Linux boot Linux type device here. And we actually have to change this. So you want to hit T, and then if you hit capital L, it'll list out all the codes. But the code you want for the boot partition is 4. And if you do a print here, and it actually says FAT32. Actually, I don't want that. I want this Linux. I'm pretty sure I did this Linux. They recommend doing this FAT32, but I actually changed this back to Linux. So let's do T. Let's see here, 83. We'll see how this installation goes. Okay, Now we need to make swap. So let's do a new primary 2, and swap is usually like the size of your RAM minus or times 2. They don't really do that anymore. If you have 2 gigs of RAM or higher, I don't recommend making the swap partition any bigger than 2 gigs. So I'm just going to do 2 gigs here. And actually the type is going to change here. So you hit type 2, and you hit L. And the code for swap is 82. So if you match that up here, it says Linux swap right here, 82. So now we have 512 meg boot, 2 gig swap, and then I'm going to use the rest of the hard drive for the operating system. So primary, new, primary, 3. First sector is enter, and then you can just hit enter here again, and it'll do the rest of the hard drive. So if you look here, I have 17 gigs for the rest of the hard drive. It's plenty of space for Gentoo Linux. Once you're ready, you want to hit W to write this out. And now let's format the drives, or the partitions. So the next thing we want to do is let's turn on the swap, or first format the swap. So it's make swap, and then you want to do swap on dev sda2, and now let's format mkfs ext4, and I want to do SDA, and I want to do SDA3. So we formatted the boot partition as ext4. Some people do it as ext2. I believe this will work fine. I'm pretty sure I did ext4 last time I tried to do this. Okay, so the next part is we have to mount the hard drive. So you want to do mount dev sda3, which is your Linux, where your Linux machine is going to sit, and then you're going to do mount Gentoo. And now we have to make the boot partition on the hard drive on that partition. So it's make dir mount Gentoo boot, and now we have to mount the boot partition also. So now we have it. This file system is mounted here, and then the boot partition is mounted to here. Okay. If the date time is set up wrong, you can specify it. Look in the docs. It's basically just date, space, month, day, year, time, blah, blah, or just look at the docs. This is fine. This is actually correct for my time zone and everything. So the next thing we want to do is go to our directory here, and we're going to get the stage 3 tarball. And I'll put all these notes in the descriptions below. It's basically just a wget. The other thing all the documents talk about is verifying the hashes of the files you are downloading. You should also be doing this. I already confirmed that these are okay. They just guarantee that you get the download correctly and the hashes match. And when the hashes match, you know you have 100% correct file from the distribution. So I already did all that in the previous test that I did. So I'm not going to do that in this tutorial. They're all in the Gentoo handbook. The next command after we're going to do this is we're going to extract this stage 3 tarball. And this tarball is the bare minimum of a Linux distribution. You can see it's pretty small. It's right around 200 megs, which is pretty small for a Linux distribution. So let's extract this, and this is the command to do it. tar xvjpf and it actually does this nice stage star here. So every time there's a new build of Gentoo, they change these numbers a little bit, so you can just run this command, and it'll always extract correctly. Okay, so this is extracting all the minimum files for Linux. The next thing we're going to do is set a parameter for when packages get compiled. Now, if you don't set this parameter, it'll be fairly slow to compile packages. When you have multi-core machines, like this virtual machine, I gave it 4 cores. So you want to actually tell the compiler, hey, I have 4 cores. Use all 4 cores as much as possible during the installation of packages, as well as we're going to get to the kernel in a minute here. So we're going to do vi mount gentoo etc portage make. This has all types of extra flags that you can set. These are all in the docs, and they're very well described in there. But here I'm going to just add this make ops, make opts equals -j4. If you ever compiled software, you know about this -j parameter. This basically is how many cores you have, or how many you want to be used during compiled packages. So I'm going to write that out and quit. The next thing I'm going to do is get some mirrors. So in order to update and get packages from Gentoo, we need some mirrors. And the mirrors contain all the packages. In the US, I use this http gentoo-osu-osl.org. This is usually one of the faster mirrors I've had really good uptime with, as well as one of the faster ones. So I always use this OSU OSL. You can go to their website. I believe it's a school, and they have very, very good connections to the internet. So we're going to put that inside that file. And then there's this sync command. Oh, that command actually didn't succeed here. And the reason why is there is multiple. So you want to make sure this all goes in this file. And to do that, I put a quote mark here and a quote mark here, a single quote, because there's already double quotes here. So we can actually do that, and then let's actually make sure. Let's go in this file and look and make sure it worked correctly. Yep. So that worked correctly. The next one is this one. And the same problem here. You got to do single quote, and then single quote here, and then that looks good. Sync equals this. You can also come in this file and use vi and paste. It's up to you. The docs tell you to use these echo commands. The next thing you want to do is copy your DNS over to the system. Now, Mount Gentoo, up to this point, this Mount Gentoo is the Linux distribution that's currently booted, like that you're running. As soon as you hit this directory right here, or this slash, you're essentially inside your installation of Gentoo. And I know that's a little confusing, and I'll show you that in a minute, but so basically this is the top of your tree, or the top of like imagine this is your C drive for if you're familiar with Windows. This is the top of the Linux distribution in the installation. So if you went cd like this is where it starts for the operating system you're configuring during the installation. So just copied over the DNS entries. I'm not even sure they're right. To tell you the truth, I think I had to fix those later on. Okay, now we're going to get into mounting a bunch of partitions. And basically these mount points are just how Linux understands what where things need to be. So I do a mount this proc, I mount this rbind, I mount these all inside of my installation here. Okay? Now, this is one of the best commands out there. This groot basically saying, go into this directory and run bash. And this is essentially saying, as soon as I hit enter now, I am actually inside my new Gentoo Linux server here. So if I hit Control D, it'll go back out. But if I hit up enter, now if you look at like etc resolve here, see there's no VI here actually, because now I'm inside the Gentoo system. So nano exists on here. And you can see this is what it copied over, and we're going to fix this later on. But this is essentially the top of the tree now of your new booted system, even though we haven't restarted anything, haven't done anything yet. Okay? So the first thing they tell you to do is source this file. And it just basically sets a bunch of profile stuff here. Don't worry about all that stuff. Oh, this will change the prompt here. Okay. So this changed the prompt to what it expected. It tells you you're in a root environment. Okay. Now we're gonna do this emerge web sync, and this is essentially syncing with the distribution to make sure all the packages and everything are up to date. And you can see here, this came through on those echo commands before. So once this is done syncing, this is essentially apt-get update on Debian or Ubuntu. The next command, I believe, is the upgrade command, apt-get upgrade instead of update. Just like on Gentoo, there's two commands. One syncs the new packages and just says this package needs to be ready to upgrade, and the next command actually upgrades them. So let this command finish. And some of these take a little bit longer than we're used to, because this is doing. This is probably doing a giant rsync right now. Okay. Let's do emerge -- sync now. If you have a really slow terminal, like you're remoted into a machine that has very slow internet, you can do they recommend -- quiet, but then it won't scroll all these packages. But since this is a local machine, it works fine without quiet. Now they have what's going to show up here. All these different profiles, and I'm actually not too familiar with these profiles. These are fairly new for me. I don't think Gentoo always had these profiles, but they seem pretty nice. If you've ever used, what is it called on Gentoo or on Debian, I want to say, the task select stuff. So like I would guess that these e-selects on Gentoo are the same as task select on Debian. It's essentially like a pre-configured set of packages that you want. And to do this, we just do e-select profile list, and it'll actually spit out all the different profiles that are available. Now you can see the start here defaults to 1, which means that profile is selected. Now you can select any one of these profiles. I actually tried to do this one, and it didn't go so well. So I'm going to just stick with this one and not install a GUI this time. If you're brave, you can do eSelect profile set and then the number, and then it'll actually compile all the packages for systemd and GNOME. I think there was like 183 packages it needed to compile. This took about 90 minutes to compile, so I'm not going to show you that in this tutorial. Maybe I'll make a time lapse of it later on and just publish it to YouTube to show you what it actually does. But if you want to try it yourself, go right ahead and change it here. You can also see there's different types here, like there's an SE Linux hardened version. This is like, you can Google what hardened is and it'll tell you why and what is changed. SE Linux is a security enhanced Linux kernel. But for this tutorial, I'm just going to leave this all at default. So I'm just going to do eSelect profile 1, even though it was already selected. That's how you select the profiles. Okay, now to set some stuff that you just automatically pick in the other tutorials. You got to pick your time zones. So if you do an ls user share zone info here, we have America here, and I live in Chicago. So to set this, you just do this. You do echo America Chicago, and you put it as the time zone into this file. And then you execute this command, emerge config syslibs time zone data. And it just set my time zone to Chicago. Okay. Now we have to set some stuff for the local, the locales they call them. And basically what I suggest you do here is, if you're in English, I just do ENUS. I actually uncomment both these. I want to do this one, and of course I'm in Nano and not VI. So I want to do these two English ones. If you're in different languages here, you can set these. These are French. These are other type. This is Japan. So I just set these two locales. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to set both of them, but it seemed to work fine last time I did this. So I'm just going to leave both of them. You can read more about what locales are. It's basically to support multiple languages, I believe, and keyboards, because you can imagine the Japanese keyboard is totally different with different characters. Okay, so let's set this. So you do local gen. Okay. You can verify if there was this locale -a. I have a couple here. I have US English, ISO, UTF, and then postfix, which is all fine. Okay. Oh, then it wants me to actually select one. So you could say I want all these available, but I'm only going to use this one here, this UTF one. I actually do eSelect locale set for. And now it has the star next to it, which means this one is selected. Okay. Now we're going to run some updates. I believe this runs some environmental updates. Now we're going to start configuring the kernel. So we're going to do emerge --ask. And basically ask is just going to prompt you to make sure you want to install all these packages. If you remove ask, it'll just do it automatically. So basically it's just going to say a couple new things here, and we're just going to type yes here. What's also nice about Gentoo is everything that is being installed here is considered bleeding edge, or the most up-to-date kernels, the most up-to-date packages. that is one thing that really lags behind in the other distributions. If you've ever used like Debian Stable, you know that most of the packages are at least a year old, and if you switch to unstable, you're getting closer to Gentoo, but you're not. Gentoo is using the most recent packages for one of the most recent packages for all this stuff, and you can see here even seeing the 4.0.5 kernel is pretty new. If you look at all the other installations, their chances are they're not even on 4.0 yet. So this will tell you what kernel you're going to run. We're going to run Linux 4.0.5 Gentoo. Okay, so the next part is kind of a cheating, I would say, if you've ever installed Gentoo. This is going to install a way to automatically compile the kernel for me. It's up to you, but I recommend doing this unless you really know the hardware of your system and you really want to tinker with the kernel itself. Now, the kernel actually has a menu-driven system, and you can go through all the menus and select your network adapters and select this and select that. Since I'm installing this on a virtual machine, I'm just going to auto-generate this kernel stuff here. I used to compile this all manually and go into the menu, and you can certainly do that. It's up to you whether or not you want to do that. So this is a way just to get around configuring the kernel separately. But if you feel like you want to learn that, go right ahead. It's a giant menu system. You basically just go in there and select the hardware you have. You got to make sure you select everything, and then you'll essentially do the same thing. You'll compile the kernel, and it'll compile the kernel just like it did. Actually, we didn't get to compiling it yet. This essentially just got the packages to do the compile. Okay. The next thing we want to do is make sure we have this etcfs tab file set up correctly. This file essentially says where stuff should boot off of and where so this is ext4, actually, not 2. This is 4 as well. And that's actually all you have to do for this file. Actually, that's not true. I believe these have to be set correctly. So this is SDA1, this is SDA3, this is SDA2. So this is our swap partition. This is our root partition, and this is our boot partition. So I'm going to set those, write those out. Okay, now we're going to compile the kernel. And the command to do that is, I'm going to do this make ops equals -J4, and then gen kernel all. This is where you could manually configure your kernel if you wanted to. I'm just going to do this here because it's going to take some time, and actually I can pass it time. Make sure you pass it -J4 here. I don't think it picked up my settings from that other flag I set. So this will make sure you use all 4 cores during when you compile Gentoo Linux. So the other thing I wanted to show you here is nice top. You can actually see here this is close to 0, which is good. It's actually using, if you look over here, you'll see CC1, and that's actually compiling the kernel, and it's using up to 4 cores to do it. if you forget to add this make ops equals -J4, you'll only see basically one core being used to compile this kernel. And sometimes the kernel can take a while depending on your hardware. Right now it's using all 4 cores of this virtual machine to compile the kernel here. And it still takes some time to do it, even with 4 cores. If your machine has more, feel free to add more here. Some Linux servers have like 8 and 16 cores. You can essentially assign your KVM server here as many cores as you can. The other thing you could do is assign it a bunch during the startup, compile Gentoo, get this all, compile the kernel, get everything running, and then scale back the amount of cores it has. That was also a tip I saw online where people were assigning more cores than they wanted and then scaling back once the virtual machine was set up and configured correctly. As you can see, this is taking quite a bit of time to run, but we're getting down to the last part of this installation, and this essentially is everything that is going on in the background when you install a different distribution. You just don't see it, so you can imagine the amount of work that goes into writing just a tool just to install Linux. So I give props to all the people that write the GUIs to do these. The way the Ubuntu installation has basically come to like 5 steps, and it's essentially almost done within a couple minutes. As you can see here, this video is going on and on and on, and we're still compiling this kernel right here. So the way Debian and the other distributions have it is the kernel is usually already compiled. 99% of the time it's already compiled. So here is a step that is definitely taking a lot longer than it would on other Linux distributions. So the next step after this is done is we're going to link. Let's see here. We have to set the host name. We're going to do some network setup. The one thing that was very strange, and maybe someone knows why this happens, but the way the virtual machine assigns the Ethernet adapter is not a typical. I think I can. So you can see here it's like ENP0S3. I don't know why this is just not ETH0, but this threw me off when you finally go to restart this machine and you still have no network. So even though this machine automatically detected this, and it has to probably do with the way this KVM virtual machine is configured, I didn't select anything different here. So if I go view details and I go down to NIC here, I am just using this regular, this is all defaults, this RTL 8139, and maybe that has something to do with why this is not just ETH0. So you actually have to fix that, and you can fix it after you reboot the system, or you can fix it once this kernel is done compiling. I recommend at least getting the system up and running first. I'll be happy if I reboot this machine and it actually boots correctly. And don't be discouraged if you get through all the Gentoo steps and then you reboot the system and then it doesn't boot correctly. It happens to everyone, and the only reason that this may work is because I've gone through all the steps once and tried to confirm this. But when I first started learning all this, you can imagine that you would reboot the machine and then it doesn't boot. And then, so the way you get back to where we are right now, where it's compiling, is you want to go back into this virtual machine here and go to details. You want to make sure the CD-ROM here is added. You can see that it's disconnected, or there's a disconnect button here. Once I know this machine is booting correctly, I'll disconnect this. You go to boot options here. You want to move the CD-ROM up, and then you want to just boot the Linux distribution again, or the installation file again. And then you want to go back through your mount commands. So remember we did the proc, you want to do mount dev SDA3 to mount Gentoo. Then you want to do mount dev SDA1 to mount Gentoo boot. And then you want to make sure you do all those mount procs, rbin, make rslave, and I'll have these all in the notes. Then once you do that, you want to chroot or chroot back into it, and it's just chroot mount Gentoo bin bash. And then once you're back at that prompt, you're essentially editing your machine that it's going to boot off of. And I'll actually show you that here once this compiling has completed. Okay, this should be done pretty soon. And you can see it takes quite a bit. And if you don't pass that -J4, you'll be sitting here a long time. Okay, let's see here. And all these commands are in the Gentoo documentation. The other thing I ran into too once this finishes is that the DNS records that came from, I can actually show you here. These were auto-generated, and it says 192.168.122.1, which is, I'm guessing, this is part of the virtual machine. And instead I just changed these to 8.8.8 and 8.8.4.4, which are Google's DNS records. These seem to not work correctly. So like, I was able to ping, say, my router, which is 192.168.1.1, but I wasn't able to like ping google.com. So if you're able to ping the gateway or the router and you can't ping google.com, chances are etcresolve.conf is messed up. So actually, while this is compiling, I'm just going to fix these. It looks like it's almost done. Anyway, we can fix these anyway. So in here, you want to do mount Gentoo, and then etc, and let's do resolve. So you want to make sure you're changing the ones in mount Gentoo, because the ones outside that, the one just etc resolve.config, are not yours, not the ones that you want to do. And hopefully these don't change, but they may. And I hate not having VI here. Oh, this is VI. Okay, so you can see here the kernel took 9 minutes to compile without. So make sure you do ext4. I'm sorry. Make sure you do -J4, or this could take 4 times that amount to compile. Okay, so we just fixed the DNS records. Let's set the host name. I'm just going to call this Gentoo. Easy host name. Not having VI. It's pain switching to nano. Okay. This command actually shows you what was compiled to. So you can see that here's what's going to boot, and here's the RAM FS. This is part of the boot stuff here. Okay. So the next thing we're going to do is set up this networking. And in the docs it says to do this. But instead of ETH0, we're going to do that crazy... this, ENP0S3. Because you don't want ETH0 because it won't work. So we're going to do that. And then we're going to tell it to start on boot, which is RC update add. And it's net here. So I want to do net ENP. And then it'll say added to run level, so that'll actually start. The other thing you want to do is, I'm not sure this step is needed, but I added it anyway. So they recommended going into this conf directory and editing this net file, net, and I added these modules. And this is going to be DHCPD, and config ENP0S3 is DHCP, DHCP. And you can read about all these parameters in the docs. Basically, they're just saying how to configure the DHCP stuff. Like, I believe this says, this no DNS says, don't edit the etc resolve file on us. No NTP is something different. No IS. They recommended adding all these. Okay, so let me just make sure these are correct. Modules DHCPD. Okay, then config ENP0S3, DHCP. Okay, those all look good. Okay, so let's write that file out. Okay, let's actually install some packages now. And the typical way to do this is just to merge. Now we're actually installing these packages in the system already, even though we haven't even booted our new system yet. So I'm going to actually remove this app. So we want syslog for sure. This will tell you if there's something wrong with log what your system's doing. You can see this is all compiling from source now. And the next command you want to do is make sure you start syslog at boot, which will be that same RC update command. You can actually see here it's using all 4 cores too. This one actually uses that -J from the first time that you put in that into that file. What was it called? The etc portage make file. So that actually picked up that -J4 from that file and is using that. So let's make sure we start syslog on boot. The next thing is if you want cron. You can see how customizable Gentoo is. I mean, every Linux distribution I've ever seen comes with cron, but if you don't want cron, then your Gentoo Linux distribution doesn't need it. So let's update cron to start. Let's do locate, which is a I like to use mlocate versus find. Find is, of course, a little bit slower, but I like that mlocate can build the database of files and then do a locate command. So let's make sure that starts on startup too. Okay, that was cron. I don't think mlocate needs that. So you want to make sure SSH starts. Okay, this one said it was already there. Oh no, it wasn't. So you want to make sure SSH starts. So SSH must be installed by default. And then you want this DHCPD. Package as well to get DHCP from, so you can get the IP address automatically from the DHCP server. Now a couple more steps. The bootloader. You got to make sure you have a bootloader in order to boot the system. So we have to install grub. And the next thing we're going to tell grub is where our boot partition is on this system. So if you remember, we did you actually just do SDA here versus SDA1. You just have to, I believe it installs it into the master boot record, and then you're able to boot this Linux distribution. And we'll actually see if this I think we're almost done here. Then we can actually install some extra packages too. We still don't have VI here. I'm going to install Screen, and I'm going to install Apache 2 before the end of the tutorial. So this is even installing grub from compiling grub right now. And that's why it's so important to set those -j variables, because if you don't, you'll be waiting a long time for this to finish. This should be almost done, and then we're gonna tell grub where to boot off of, which is just going to be SDA, dev SDA, and then we're going to create a grub.cfg file as well. And okay, let's do. So this is grub2 install dev. You don't need one here. You're just going to tell it to boot off this first drive. And that's good that it says installation finished, no errors reported. Let's make a grub.cfg file. And I just want to look at this real quick to make sure. Let's see what it says. Okay, yeah, you shouldn't have to edit anything in there, because that's all auto-generated for you. Okay, let me look at these notes one more time, and I think we're ready to reboot this machine and see if it actually starts correctly. So you want to type exit here. So now we're outside the ch root environment. Now you also want to make sure you're outside of it here. We're going to try to unmount some of these partitions. Sometimes they don't always unmount, that I noticed on the other one. So this one worked fine. I just did unmounted these two. These I think had more of a problem unmounting. They say device busy. I tried a bunch to do it. You probably can force it, but instead I just reboot the machine. And you want to make sure the machine's idle, so you can do top. Just make sure nothing else is being used. I'm not sure Maybe if I do SDA1. Oh, did I already unmount those? Oh, one last thing. Pretty important to do, actually, before we do anything else, is you have to set your root password here inside of the... Is this mounted? Oh, yeah, I think let's just make sure these still are mounted. Okay, so dev sd3, okay, that's good. And the boot partition, where's boot? Actually don't see boot. And then you want to do the chi root. And then you want to make sure you set the root password. Because even though you set it outside, you're actually setting it right now for your new machine. Okay. Now let's exit. And let's try to unmount these again. Unmount, mount. Gentoo boot. Unmount. Mount Gentoo. It's still giving me that busy error, which is kind of a pain. Okay, I'm gonna reboot this. Fingers crossed. See how it goes. So, I'm just gonna type reboot here. Here goes nothing. Now you can see grub loaded, which is good. That's the first step. I didn't actually even press anything there. And it actually looks like it's booting for the first time. Now don't get discouraged if you boot your system and it doesn't boot correctly. Just go back through the mount commands, boot, and I'll show you how to do this. Let's log in for the first time. So this is our new system. We'll actually see if we got an IP address. And it looks like we do, which is good. It used this ENP0S3. So forewarning, you got to change all that from ETH0 to ENP0S3. Let's SSH into this machine. It's going to be SSH root at 192.168.122.191. You can see we're on our new Linux system. So the system takes up about 3 gigs. I have 14 gigs available. And it actually booted and actually worked correctly. So to troubleshoot this, if you needed to go back, I'll actually show you that real quick. Let's shut this down. So come back here. Go to your virtual machine, go to details. So you can see here the CD-ROM disconnected once you rebooted. And that's why the machine booted correctly. So if we want to connect this back to troubleshoot something, let's do back this. And then you want to go to boot options. You want CD-ROM, you want to make sure it's above the hard drive. So then hit apply. Then come back here and click start. And this machine should look familiar. Press enter, and now you're back at the prompt for the installation again. And you just want to run through those commands, and I'll show you real quick. Once this boots, and you can do all the commands in here, but I'm just going to show you in SSH so it's easier to see. You always got to set your root password here again, because it's basically not the same, because you're you reboot it off the installation. So chances are it's just garbage for the installation part. Okay. Now you want to mount dev SDA 3 to mount Gentoo, mount dev SDA 1 to mount Gentoo boot. And it helps if you type this correctly. And you also want to do all these mounts here again. Just copy and paste those, and then you can just chroot, however you want to pronounce it, back into the system here, and now you can fix anything that went wrong. So if you think if you don't see grub, chances are you missed a grub command. If it gets to grub but then it doesn't boot the system, chances are you screwed up fs tab here. Fs tab tells it where to boot and stuff too. So you want to make sure these all are correct as well. Some other troubleshooting tips is that if you have any questions or you run into it, just put them in the comments and we'll see if we can troubleshoot your machine. But those are the two most common: is screwing up grub, not installing it to SDA. If you do like SDA 1, sometimes that doesn't work correctly. So just double check, triple check what you've actually done inside here. And if you screw it up, don't worry. You can always come back here and fix it. And this is actually how you can get into any Linux system pretty easily. This is a method, and there's some ways to secure boot partitions. But as you can see, I mounted these mount points, and I'm already in here. So if I went to mount, if I went to etc, I can actually change my password here, and it would change the root password. So if you're ever on an interview, this happens a lot too. An interview question will be, how do you change the root password of a Linux system? This is how you do it. You can boot a Linux distribution. Now some of them will prevent you from doing this, like Red Hat, if you set it up correctly. But you'll boot an ISO like this, you'll mount the hard drives, you chroot into it, and then you just run pisswd, and then you're changing the root password of the system. So anyone that tells you that the root password is secure, chances are they don't know much about Linux, because as you can see here, it's pretty easy to bypass. There's no logins here at all. Okay, so I'm going to exit out of here, and I'm going to try to unmount these things again. I'm not really sure why these don't unmount very well, but what are you going to do? The reboot will definitely unmount them. It keeps saying it's busy, and you can probably figure out why, but instead I'm just going to reboot it. Okay, now you can see that it's actually stuck on this thing. So we're going to shut this down pretty quickly. You can just do force off. And we're going to go back in here and remove the CD-ROM, because we don't want it to booting off the CD-ROM anymore. We can actually uncheck this, hit apply, go back here, and let's start the virtual machine again. You can see there it didn't even boot the ISO that time. We're going to let this machine boot. Okay, let's log in here. Get the IP address, 191. Okay, so this is our new Gentoo Linux machine. And that was basically the installation of how crazy an installation of Linux is on all the distros. They all do this. So, and I recommend going through these and at least learning it once, because it's very good knowledge. Some last things you can do with Ubuntu is, let's run some updates. Let's see if there's any updates. this is the command to run updates. It's a pretty crazy command. It's emerge. This says update all the dependencies, and at world means everything. So we'll see if there's any. It should be fully up to date because we just updated. That's what's also nice is that during the installation, you're essentially updating the whole machine. Tomorrow you may have updates, but as of right now, after the installation, you don't have to run updates. You know that everything was brand new from the installation. But those are the two commands to run updates. So let's install some other stuff. Let's do Vim, which is another good package. Another command, or another one is you want to install Screen, and I'm actually going to install Apache too. And you can see here, you can actually I just saw it right here. It is picking up this -J. I don't know why it says -1, but it is doing. You can prove that it is picking those. It's scrolling so fast, it's having a hard time keeping up. If I do top here, you'll see it's using all 4 cores. It won't do all 4 cores only when it's compiling. So like right now, it's compiling, and you'll see this drop to 0. So this is installing Vim. We're going to install Screen. And you can see that Vim required 5 dependencies here. You can see here it actually is compiling more than just Vim here. So there was 5 other packages that were dependent on Vim. So this was also nice about Gentoo. It'll actually compile every package for you. Okay, so now if you type Vim, you'll have Vim. Let's install Screen. Delete this ask. You can see Screen, no dependencies. Last but not least, we're going to install an Apache web server. And this one does take a little bit of time because you can imagine Apache is probably a pretty big piece of software. There's 3 other dependencies, and it takes a little bit, but luckily when you have that -J4 installed here or configured correctly, you'll get pretty fast compile times on all this stuff. So this should be done in a second, and I'll show you that Apache works. The other thing too is you want to make sure you remember to do these RC update commands, and this is actually the same on Debian-based machines. In order for systems to boot certain services when they start, you want to make sure you run this RC update, add the service name, and then you just pass it default, which basically will say which run level that the server should start as. And you can read about Linux run levels if you want, and they just are basically a way to say, for example, you can't start Apache before the network starts, so the run levels determine that. So let's start that, and let's go to, and of course all Linux distributions put different directories for where Apache is. On Gentoo it's var www localhost htdocs, and we can edit this to thanks for watching the tutorial on installing Gentoo. Take this IP address, and where's the browser here? Helps if you start Apache. It actually could not start it, which is interesting. Let's try it again. I wonder if I needed... It doesn't like this, actually. Failed to start user. I'm going to look this up real quick. See what Google says. There's no server name. They don't like the server name stuff. I didn't have this problem last time I did this. Oh. So I did miss something here. See? It doesn't know what my machine is here. The reason I missed this was this host file. Of course this was in my notes, but I forgot to put this in here. So you need to edit etc hosts and go to Gentoo here. And this is why it wasn't starting, because it didn't know how to bind to ping Gentoo now. So now it pings out. You don't even need to even set that this variable here at the bottom, that server name. You get it. That's what this crazy message is all the time. You don't need that. If you want to get rid of it, that's how you get rid of it. You set that server name in etc Apache 2 HTTPD. Here, I'll set it. So we can come down here and just call it server name and just call it Gentoo. And now when we start Apache, now it'll start. So there's something I missed during the installation. And there you go. Hopefully that wasn't too painful, and hopefully you learned something. I know this was a long tutorial, but I think it's a really good one to understand all the internals of Linux and what goes on during an installation. If you have any comments, leave them below. If you have any recommendations for future tutorials, please let me know, and please subscribe. Thanks for watching.